ago, because I would try, to stop. And it seemed that the longer I went without drinking, then the more I would drink on the times that I did drink. And now, of course, I know about the alcohol deprivation effect, and it all makes a lot of sense. But as I enforced more and more rules around my drinking, it had a tighter and tighter grip around me. So even if I was able to stay within these rules, it was taking up more and more real estate in my head.
Well, welcome everybody. This is Katie, and today I'm here with a special guest. I have with me Kat, who I'm really excited to have as a guest today because you and I have been in touch for almost the last 3 years. And so I've gotten to know you a little bit over the years. We actually met in person one time when we went and visited Claudia, which was really cool, for a documentary I put to the side for the time being, which I would love to pick back up at some point. But Kat is someone who used the Sinclair Method and just had tremendous success with it. And so we're here today to share her story. So I just want to start by thanking you so much for chatting with me.
Oh, my pleasure.
Well, I really just want to start, if you don't mind, just telling the viewers a little bit about you and, your history with alcohol and what it is that led you to the Sinclair Method.
Sure, of course. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Katie. This is it's surreal to think like 3 years ago, I saw you on YouTube and learned about the Sinclair Method, and then here we are, and you're going to ask me about it. I'm still getting my head around that. So let's see. I'm 41 now, and I was thinking last night, when was the first time I really drank? And it was 8th grade. I was 14 years old. I remember being at a party and I remember really liking it. And even though I didn't drink much in high school and I wasn't a big partier in college, I always liked drinking. And I, drank quite a bit in my 20s, especially in law school. And so after college, I worked a bit, and then I went to law school in my mid-20s and then started at private law firms. And it's just sort of baked into the culture in the legal profession and in law school and in lots of industries I know. But I think there's just a lot more expectations sort of around client interactions and happy hours and things like that. And that's certainly gotten better over the years. There's more awareness now of it even than there was 10 or 15 years ago. But I think that's where I started drinking more and more, probably in that phase of my life. And it was really my late 20s. So after kind of a few years of that I started wondering about how much I was drinking and noticing that it wasn't just on the weekends. It wasn't just, at happy hours. It was at home now. And it was around that time that my husband and I decided to start a family. And so when I got pregnant at 29, I thought, great, I'm turning a corner. Like I'm starting this new chapter of life where I can't drink anyway because I'm going to be pregnant and breastfeeding, and this will turn things around. So that was my 20s, and now I'm moving into my 30s, right? So fast forward a few years, and I have 2 little ones, and let's just say that it wasn't a new chapter so much with the drinking. I probably wanted to drink more than I ever had, and that was, of course, tempered by having 2 little ones, and I was still I worked most of those years. I did take a little time off. We lived abroad in Finland for a couple of years, and I was off there. But, in general, I don't think anyone from the outside thought I was drinking too much. It didn't look like it, right? I was just able to keep that to myself and to drink stealthily, while I was making dinner, before my husband got home, or maybe after the kids were asleep, things like that. And I was keeping up appearances like so many people, and just noticing, that I was drinking more and more and more. And so, here we are now, almost a decade later, right? I questioning my drinking in my late 20s. Now I'm in my late 30s going, is this getting any better? And no, of course, as you know, it's not. I'm drinking more and more as I get older. And I finally have a couple of eye-opening events. One I know I've shared with you is a little bit strange in that in my late 30s, I found out that my dad was not my biological father. And when I tracked down my biological father, I learned that he had died in an alcohol-related overdose when I was 12 years old. We had never known about each other. And so it was helpful in the sense that I didn't see alcoholism in my family. And when I learned about his story and his troubles with alcohol, he was 39 when he died. And here I was 38. And so I really, I had to get it together. I knew I did. And even that wasn't enough though, because I would try, to stop. And it seemed that the longer I went without drinking, then the more I would drink on the times that I did drink. And now, of course, I know about the alcohol deprivation effect, and it all makes a lot of sense. But as I enforced more and more rules around my drinking, it had a tighter and tighter grip around me. So even if I was able to stay within these rules, it was taking up more and more real estate in my head. And I really credit meditation in large part to helping me to see that. I had been, on and off meditating for years, and it wasn't really until my mid-30s that I kind of recommitted. And I think that it started to pay off, and that I could witness, how much thinking was going into when would I drink again, and how much could I drink, and all of these rules. So again, even learning this about my biological father, I knew I had to stop, but I couldn't figure it out. And I couldn't really imagine how. The idea of a life without drinking just seemed, it was like unimaginable to me, which sounds funny right now, but it was at the time. I think back. So I had a really rough night, which I'm not going to lie, I've had many of those in my life. This one wasn't, it was worse than many, in a long time, but nonetheless, it wasn't like the worst one I've ever had. But for whatever reason, that next day, I was in such pain. People talk about a dark night of the soul. I was like, I had a dark day of the soul. That whole next day, I was in a great deal of physical pain, and I think spiritual, from just everything that had been going on around this. And it took, I think, all day for me to be able to stand the light on my phone. I remember it was late in the evening when I could finally stand to look at my phone and to search. And once again, and I've been doing this for a few years, searching for alternatives to Alcoholics Anonymous, just because AA did not, the concept of it had never worked for me. I had looked into it before, but spirituality was paramount in my life, and had been my whole life. So I had already been praying and giving it up and asking for guidance and help for a long time. And so that didn't seem to be the path for me. But I think my prayers were answered on that day when I came across Claudia's TED Talk, and then next your channel. And then it just took less than a week for me to get hooked up with a provider, and to get Naltrexone, and to get the guidance I needed, and meet with you and start that journey. So that's how I found TSM. It's decades of drinking, and then only 11 months with the Sinclair Method before I just didn't care anymore.
One of those times where you truly don't want to care, and it's a good thing. No longer caring about alcohol. I hope you don't mind me asking you this, Kat, but I just had a woman write to me a couple of weeks ago who was a mom, and she was really struggling with drinking as a way to cope with motherhood and the stress that comes along with that. And she was asking if I had any interviews on my channel with other moms. And I don't know that I have interviewed maybe I have, but we haven't spoken about that. And so I'm just curious, as a mom, and obviously as a lawyer with probably a high pressure job, and, lots of responsibility and lots to juggle in your life, what was it like, learning to cope with those things as you were reducing your drinking? And not to assume that you used alcohol to cope with the stress of motherhood, I don't know, but I'm just curious, what was that like from your mom hat type perspective of, desiring to change your relationship with alcohol, and then going on the Sinclair Method and kind of navigating those lifestyle changes that come along when we truly change our drinking habits?
Well, I'm really glad you brought it up because, it isn't something you and I have discussed much. And there is a huge, I'll say, mommy wine culture. I think that's the phrase people use. I'm not a big wine drinker. I'm out here in Colorado. We brew more beer than any state in the country, and I liked craft brews, and that was tended to be what I drank. Nonetheless, it didn't matter, right? I mean, there were meetups. Geez, it doesn't matter if it's a kid's birthday party or book club or anything, right? There's always drinking involved, pretty much. Not to say that you had to drink, I'm just saying it's baked in. It's just part of the culture. It's part of the expectations. And it was like, just no question, like, hey, do you want to bring, especially with little ones, like, hey, do you want to bring the little ones over? You and I'll have a drink and visit, and they can play, which might not be a problem for everyone. I'm not saying that is necessarily a problem. It just is if you happen to have an alcohol use disorder issue. If you're in that percentage of folks that, it's very addictive for you. I think alcohol, we know now, is just an addictive substance in general, but, for those like me, where, I was drinking more and more and becoming increasingly dependent on it, it didn't help that the mommy wine culture was just rampant. And this was, available to me and permissible and even expected, whenever I hung out with other moms, and then also, or parents, I should say. And then also, just to the coping point, of course, I was drinking in ways to cope with the stress of young children. Having young children or a child, I think parenting in general, it's very stressful, and young ones especially. That was maybe one of the most stressful periods of my life. And so if alcohol is your go-to for stress relief, as it was for me, then, you just drink more and more in those stressful times. Of course, the irony is that, as I would drink, I didn't get it at the time, but as I drank less, I became more competent to handle stress. So I thought that I wasn't very competent with stress and needed the alcohol. But that's an addiction, right, is what's going on. And as you lose the addiction, you actually gain more energy, clarity, more competence. So it's like the opposite happens. It seems like it's going to be harder to cope. And in the short term, I suspect there were harder times. But what it did, I have a great example. I mentioned drinking while I made dinner, and to kind of get through the dinner, bath, bedtime routine, as most parents know, especially with little ones, and the weekday evenings is pretty intense. And I remember thinking, there's no way that I can't drink during that. And the reality is that when I didn't drink during that time, I was finally clear to see where the issues were and what needed to change, right? So maybe it was, splitting up dinner, making responsibilities with my husband, or, getting a meal prep service a couple nights a week. I'm just saying, like, once the fog was cleared, then we could actually address issues, and then things got better, if that makes sense. So, but all of that, I can say all of that and say it doesn't matter. If you're addicted, you're addicted, right? And so all the stress coping mechanisms in the world can be helpful, but the real problem for me at the end of the day was physical addiction. And that was the miracle of naltrexone, was that help.
Yeah, absolutely. You explained that so well. Is there any just practical tips you might say to moms out there who are currently struggling with alcohol? Maybe they're considering the Sinclair Method or getting started. Like, what would you say is something, that you wish you would have known at the time, or that really helped you kind of, just approaching the day-to-day of changing your drinking habits while juggling the responsibility of kids?
Well, I would say, there's at least like three things came all at once. So the first thing, very practical thing that I would say is having a practitioner. For me, having a remote practitioner that I could meet with at home, a providing prescriber. So I worked with Brian Noonan at SinclairMethod.org, I think he was my provider. Having that remote relationship was really important because I didn't have to leave the house or get childcare. I could just meet with him from home, just like you and I are doing. So that, is huge. I think whatever you can do to make it logistically convenient for you, you have a better chance of sticking with it. And then I think seeing it as an experiment, I don't think I mentioned that, but I was 38 when I started, and due to my personal story, I had this number of 39 with my biological father's overdose in my mind. So I told myself that I had until I was 39 to figure out if I was comfortable with my relationship with alcohol. And I didn't mention this, but it's really key to the story, is that I did not plan on quitting drinking. I was excited about the Sinclair method because I thought it would just help me to be a moderate drinker, slow down my drinking, and feel better about how much I was drinking. So that's my other practical tip, is like, don't see it as, years of a journey in front of you. Just maybe whatever it is that you can commit to. Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months, 9, 12? Make just like a little experiment of it and practice 100% compliance, if at all possible, just in that short period of time, and see what happens, and mark the day on your calendar. You can come back to it later, because sometimes I think as busy parents, the idea of adding one more thing in just sounds really, at least to me, like, no, thank you. One more thing. And then finally, I'll say, and I think every mom listening or parent, caregiver of children would already feel this way, but it's worth saying, the self-respect that comes with facing this head on and being open and honest about it, about addiction, can only benefit your children so much, even if you don't do it perfectly, even if it's a journey and there's lots of falling down and getting back up. The fact that now we can talk about addiction in our family openly, I mean, my kids know my story, not all the details perhaps, but I mean, I'm open about it to, an appropriate extent. I think that's such a gift, that they can have that sort of story and understanding about that going into their lives. So, beyond the very practical benefits of not feeling hungover Saturday morning, I spent a lot of Saturday mornings in bed. And, when that changed and I was able to go, watch cartoons with my kids Saturday morning, or just do other things with them, it's not something I had really thought about, was the time I was missing with them by either sleeping in late or just not wanting to go do as much because I was feeling hungover. So that's another thing to celebrate and look forward to as a parent.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. So I wanted to ask you now, maybe just to tell us a little bit about your Sinclair Method journey, kind of starting out, and what your experience was. I know you kind of mentioned that, you didn't mean to go sober, but we know that you did go sober after almost a year on the method. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your Sinclair Method journey in general? And I wanted you to mention as well, because I know your story. I know that you struggled with the side effects of naltrexone when you first started. So touching on that and just kind of what it was like for you over the course of the many months you were doing the method.
I'm so glad you said that, because, when I think about the story right now, it's like all rainbows and cupcakes, and then when I go back and read my journal that first week, I mean, when I talked to you, I think I'd only had 3 or 4 doses and I was miserable in the beginning. If I had only looked at day 1, I wouldn't be here today. So day 1, I was pretty ill. Not just, so the first time I took the pill, I threw up. In hindsight, I was hungover, at least a bit, it wasn't like massive, but like I had had quite a bit to drink the night before. And so now I know that was, I think, also a part of it, and I think I started on the full dose, or maybe half, I can't remember now, but whatever it was too much for me. And so luckily having, really good resources and help, including my call with you, I was able to slow it way down. And I think I might have even cut the pill into eighths in the beginning. I mean, it was like really little doses. It took me, I think, 3 weeks to get up to the full dose. And I just, experimented, with taking it with food or taking it not with food, or, I just kind of paid attention to my body and tried to figure it out. But I stuck with it because I had to try it. I had told myself I'm at least going to try this, until my birthday, right, which was nearly a year away, or not quite, but 6 months. And I really, I'm glad that I stuck with it, because all those negative side effects went away. I never threw up again. That was just on the first day, which again, I attribute to having had too much to drink the night before. The combination of the naltrexone, it wasn't a good combo for me. And then while I did have, kind of a little maybe woozy, euphoria, nausea sort of stuff over the next 3 weeks, it was very limited. It was typically only within like 2 hours of taking the pill, and it went away. It just was a matter of me sticking with it. And I'm not one for prescription medicines. That was actually, oh, there's so many things about this experience that were very humbling, but I'm going to say that was up there for me. The humility of getting a prescription and having prescription medication, that just had not been something I'd been willing to do. My pride had just kept me from that in my life in most ways. And this was very humbling to have this medication that I knew I wanted the results from it, but I was going to have to hang in there with it. So to anyone starting out, when I've had the opportunity to visit with them, I always encourage them to just at least 1 month, and everyone, I know different providers do this differently, and things change for every person. But for me, taking it every day for the first 4 weeks was really helpful, because it helped me to get used to it. And then after that, once I was used to it, then I went just to taking it before I was drinking. And that second month was really, that's, I think, when it got kind of fun, because I started implementing the actual method, right? I know the Sinclair Method is a lot of things, but in my mind, it's not just the pill. It's the magic of doing other things on the off days, right? Oh, that was just so fun to get to come up with things to do, bike rides with the kids, or, a hike. We did a lot of things intentionally on those days. I did different exercise things. I just really tried to make sure that I was using those days to the best ability to really get my body used to rewards from other places. And I think that, I hope anyway, that really contributed to my success, because I was really intentional about it. So I hope it did.
No, I just want to say that I think I would be a broken record with you. Like, what are you doing to reward yourself? Like, I'm always telling people that, because I think it's so fundamental. When I see people who are daily drinking or almost daily drinking on the method for months, and they're frustrated with their progress, I know it can be challenging for people to get alcohol-free days. Like, it's especially the first one or the first few, because previously these alcohol-free days have been so uncomfortable and difficult for people. But I totally agree with the way we understand the way naltrexone works, and the way we understand, the mechanism of it in our brain. And when we have it flushed out of our system the next day, our receptors are super sensitized. And so going out for bike rides with your kids, like, you're creating this new experience that's extra reinforcing, because it's not having that naltrexone sit on it. It's feeling really sensitive. And so it may not feel like in the moment, like extra reinforcing, but what it's doing on a neurological level is really rewiring the brain. So I totally believe that was a huge contributor to your success, because the people I see struggle, even if they're taking naltrexone religiously and seeing that it's helping with their craving or they're reducing their drinking, if they're not getting those alcohol-free days consistently, it's just, they can stay stagnant. And I've also seen, people, I had an interview on my channel a while ago. She was on the method for 9 months, basically had no alcohol-free days, was frustrated, realizing she was very much stuck in the habit. And she was like, I'm going to do a 30-day alcohol-free challenge, which is like, that's a pretty bold thing to do, after no alcohol-free days. But she never even returned to drinking after that, because she had this break and she realized, oh, my brain is actually fixed and I just don't want to drink anymore. And so I think that naltrexone is working on a deeper level than we might realize. Maybe people are even at extinction and don't realize it, because the habit can be such a strong thing at play. So just wanted to comment on what you said there, because I'm such a proponent of, that approach of really being intentional about doing things that are super pleasurable, so that we're, alcohol's pleasure is kind of being dimmed by the naltrexone, and then we do these other things and it's like, oh wow, this is actually pleasurable, actually enjoyable.
And it's such a great excuse to, whatever it is, get a massage or a pedicure or something. It was, treating myself very intentionally on those alcohol-free days, in hopes that exactly what you were saying was happening. And I think I did feel more pleasure from all of those experiences. I remember one time we went to an amusement park on one of my alcohol-free days and rode roller coasters, and I've never had so much fun. And I'm sure, like you said, there's just this sensitivity to it. And we know that, there's still, I think, work to be done in this realm, but we know that some of that kind of intense endorphin, release from things like, for me, maybe a roller coaster, for others, something else, that really, that might be similar to what we're experiencing right when we drink. And so to replace that with something else and just rewire the brain, I mean, it was like I know it's science, but it felt like magic, from where I was sitting, just imagining it all happening. And to your point about the habit, I wondered, looking back now, I feel like at 3 or 4 months from looking at my journal entries, I might have been there. I mean, I just don't even know that I cared anymore, but I just kept doing it. I kept drinking, with the naltrexone, but less and less and less, right? But it was more, at parties or events or, and a lot of that was entrenched at the time with, relaxation with my husband. It was part of our routine, often to have a drink together. And it is so much habit. And, I struggled with that aspect of it even after I quit drinking totally. So it's part of the big picture, right? There's all kinds of facets there. But I think all the time, I think about people who stop smoking. And, I didn't touch on this earlier about these kind of practical mom tips. And I think this could be for anyone. This isn't just like a mom thing, but like, about having a drink while I made dinner. I know a lot of people that do that, and it just becomes this habit. And so whatever it is that, I know you've mentioned and others about, if you drink red wine out of a big red wine glass, then put cranberry juice in it or something. And it's like this habit of, I just need something red out of this glass. And that almost does the trick. For me, it was beer, right? So instead I was like, looking for basically cold carbonated Perrier bottles, right? So it's mimicking kind of the habit of having that there while I'm cooking, but it's not alcohol. And it's so interesting how that pretty much does the trick, especially if you're using TSM, right? And the naltrexone, because at that point, it's not so much about the alcohol that you're craving. It's just the habit of it. So I think that's another really practical tip that, and I still use that, when I go to parties, I still take some kind of non-alcoholic beverage that, God, there are so many now out there, it's amazing, the options. And then it's just that, decades of having a drink in your hand at a party, it's all right to do something like that in that way, so you feel comfortable. But you can easily do that without the alcohol. So did I answer your question? I feel like I really went on a tangent.
No, that's great. And that's where naltrexone makes it possible, because before naltrexone, it's like trying to go to a party where alcohol is flowing and sip on your seltzer. It's like, no, I would be so frustrated and annoyed that I couldn't be drinking. But naltrexone gradually removes that desire. So you just don't care anymore, or you care a lot less, and you're just like, man, I don't feel like it, or I'll just have one or two. And so it's really cool.
Yeah, it's so cool. And I was shocked, I never expected this, at the number of people then who like were either supportive or asked about it out of curiosity. Like, it's sort of, I don't know, I guess that I expected either nothing or negative response. And instead I either got, nothing, but in a fine way, or positive. I got a lot more positive responses than I expected. People are curious and interested, and then often would say to me, I'm trying to cut back too, or I've been thinking about drinking less too. And it's like, by me not drinking, it gave them permission or something to say that. So that's just an interesting aspect of it all as well.
Oh yeah, I think we have the ability to really influence others in our social circles if we're cutting back, and they see us modeling that. I know when I would see people, doing that, it would kind of make me question my drinking. And so I think it's cool we have the ability to inspire people or impact people in that way just by, taking that path.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear, like, what was your timeline for drink reduction? I don't think I asked you yet, like when you started TSM, like what was your drinking pattern usually, or how much were you drinking? And then like over the 11 months, I believe you were doing the method, like what did that reduction look like for you in general?
Well, it was pretty drastic because although I had gone through lots of phases, sort of mid 30s to late 30s, so I had done a lot of rules and a lot of systems trying to drink less and less. But by the time I got to that point, I was drinking daily again, and I was I don't, it's hard to say a number because it had varied so much. It depended on the week, but I'll never forget. I think that one of the first eye-opening experiences I had around that was in my 30s, was at a doctor's office, and writing down how many drinks that I had that week. And I had to like really think about it, because it adds up so fast. Even if I had only had one or two on a weeknight, but I had done that every weeknight, and then maybe over the weekend there had been a brunch and there was a party, and it can quickly get into double digits, very quickly, right? So let's say that I was drinking every day at least 2 drinks, and then maybe on weekend nights, more. and that would vary. So, and I think that's another thing that I want to bring up. This is a good point to bring it up. I think I never got a DUI or lost a job, or I didn't maybe have the traditional alcoholic profile or AUD profile per se. And I think that a lot of people like me notice that they're drinking more and more and more over time, and it has a stronger grip on them. They cannot go to sleep without drinking. They can't feel like they can get through a social event without it or whatever. And then, at least in my experience, the less I drank, then the tighter a grip it held on me. I was thinking about it more and more. These are all signs of addiction. But because it wasn't maybe in this traditional sense, people would say to me, "Oh, you're fine. Everybody drinks too much sometimes." Or, I didn't really bring it up with people because I got a lot of that back. But I knew within myself that it was getting worse and worse and worse. And this particular event that led to me finding you, was one of the worst nights ever. And, I thrown up in front of the kids, and it was just, that was over the line, and we all have things that are over the line for us in our life and our ways. But I think it's worth saying all of that because, if you think you have a problem with your drinking, then you do. It's just that personal, right? And if you find yourself drinking more and more over the decades, that's probably not going to look great at 60 or 70, right? You think about how much that grows and changes. So I'm so sorry, Katie. Again, I went on a tangent. What were we talking about?
No, I think you're such an amazing storyteller, maybe because of your profession that you're in, but I'm captivated by everything you've shared. And the original question, which I think you've when you started the Sinclair Method, like where was your drinking at? And then
yes,
your timeline progression of reduction throughout.
Yeah. So I just want to say, I guess I'm feeling maybe a little unnecessarily defensive about the fact I don't talk about that a lot, because I know from being in groups that some people drank a lot more than me. And it's taken me a long time to, and I'm still kind of getting comfortable with talking about numbers, because I know that certainly for some people, like 1 or 2 drinks every night and a few more on the weekends may not seem like too much, but it was for me. And it was just getting worse and worse. And I was having these episodes of binge drinking that I had never had before, where 2 drinks turned into 6 or 8 very quickly. And that had never happened to me before. I was not a binge drinker. But as I now know, with the alcohol deprivation effect, it was like the better I got at longer stretches of alcohol free, then the worse the drinking episodes would get. And so that's why maybe I struggle a little bit to think about reduction in numbers. I will say this: I had numerous binge drinking episodes in the like 2 years leading up to finding TSM, and I had zero after TSM. So never after TSM did I have one of those experiences of like not having a drink for 3 or 4 days and then feeling like I was going to go have 1 or 2 and having 6. That never happened again. I think, in fact, I mean, I can go back and look. There were very few times I had more than 3 once I started the Naltrexone at one time or one session. It didn't happen anymore. I didn't have that same desire. Very quickly, I would say by 3 months, I was easily only drinking Friday, Saturday nights or weekends. So it was very fast for me that I was able to give up weekday drinking, which was huge. That was so important for my health and well-being and everything professionally. And then, by month 9, it was now like maybe I drank on a weekend or maybe I didn't. And so then I was kind of getting like a week or 2 in without drinking. And then by month 10, I started really considering whether or not I even wanted to anymore. That what I had been always seeking, I think, in all of this was freedom from addiction. More real estate, more headspace for everything else that really mattered to me. It just pissed me off how much space alcohol was taking up, rules and thinking about the drinking in my mind. And I wanted to be free of that. I think when you asked me, when we met in person in California, and you said, what does the Sinclair Method mean to you? Freedom was the first word. And I'm sure you hear that from so many people, that freedom from addiction. And that's how it happened. I had no intent of stopping drinking. And it just got to the point where I thought, do I even really care anymore? I think I'm only drinking because other people are, and it's like this habit. And so I decided to give it a try. Now that was 2 years ago today. And if you recall what happened, so March 7th, 2020, about a week later, I picked my kids up from school Friday, March 13th. It was spring break, but all the parents, we knew, spring break might be more like 2 or 3 or weeks. We didn't know at the time how long they were going to be home. But that's when everything started, and the drinking just, went through the roof, it seemed, for so many friends and family of mine, which may not be a problem for them, right? Again, but for me, that would have been, I think, really challenging. And so I feel really grateful that I made the choice when I made it, because a week later, I felt stress like I don't think any of us had ever really felt before. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up, like with regards to like the numbers and stuff, because I love that it's called alcohol use disorder now, because it puts it on a spectrum. And like you said so well, like if you feel like you have a drinking problem, you have a drinking problem, and it's such a personal choice. And that is one of the most amazing things about this method, is that if someone is like yourself, like you're drinking every day, but maybe it's not a huge amount every single day, but it still feels like a problem, especially because of the mental preoccupation. Like that mental preoccupation is such an awful thing to live with. And I know for me, when I would get bouts of sobriety, it's like on the outside, I would be sober, but my mind would still be obsessing on alcohol. And like, that is not freedom. And that's what the Sinclair Method can give us, is that freedom from alcohol. And so whether you're drinking, 2 bottles of wine a night, or a couple glasses and then having binge drinking episodes, like it can meet people where they're at and fix the problem ahead of time. Like I've had so many people tell me, man, if I would have known about this 10 years ago, my drinking, like when my drinking wasn't as bad as it is now, I could have fixed it then. And I feel like with you, like you got in on the Sinclair Method before things potentially could have escalated out of control more and more, because I've had clients in their 50s or 60s or 70s even, and they're drinking from 11 in the morning until, the afternoon, and then they take a nap and then they continue drinking again. And so it tends to build and build in a way that is more and more harmful over time. And so that's one of the things I love so much about this method, is that number one, if you feel like you have a drinking problem, then like that's your personal choice. I know people who drink a bottle of wine every day and they don't want to change anything, and that's their choice. For me, that was very harmful and destructive of where I really wanted to go. So I'm so glad this was an option. And And I'm so glad that it's called alcohol use disorder now. And I'm so glad that, you had the opportunity to kind of nip it in the bud with where you were at. Because, binge drinking and those experiences of even just, I've had clients where they binge drink, they only drink once a month, but when they do it goes insane and they damage relationships and they get DUIs or things like that. And so it's like, even just, one drinking session a month can be life altering in the most negative way possible. So just appreciate you speaking to that experience as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. The binge drinking was new and it was scary, and it added up with what had happened with my biological father's accidental death. And I think you said it right, meeting you where you're at. I mean, what a wonderful way of describing it. Like, could there be a better way to address alcohol use disorder than earlier? I mean, that's just, it's a no-brainer. But we have this weird, at least I think, and maybe it's getting better, but we've had this weird stigma and conversation going on around what it means to need help with alcohol, and it means being in a pretty bad place. And I'm all for, I've heard this, hashtag raise rock bottom, and I love that concept. I mean, we all have, I don't even like to say rock bottom, right? Because in my experience, it was an event. It was a particularly terrible event that really shook me. And it was connected to, years of struggle too. So you have to look at it all at the same time. But I think this idea that I've heard it described like an elevator, right? You don't have to take the elevator to the top floor here on alcohol use disorder. You can get off, at a lower level. It's okay. If you have a history and you see it happening and, it's going that way, I mean, step in, take steps. And I think often about, my stepdad successfully quit smoking with the help of, I don't remember now the name of the pharmaceutical, but with a prescription drug, right? And we don't question that, right? We say, yes, nicotine is addictive and it's really hard to stop. That's another one, kind of like we're saying about the habit issue, just having something in your hand. For so many people, it's that break after, a project at work or a meal or something and walking outside. There's so many habitual things that associated with smoking as well. And, we wouldn't think twice about someone using a pharmaceutical to help them kick that nicotine addiction. And it wouldn't matter how much they were smoking, right? Even if they were only smoking a little and they just wanted to be totally done with it, that idea of having that help is, I mean, it's fantastic. It's a blessing. It's wonderful. And I feel the same way about naltrexone. If it's for you, if it works for you, then, I mean, there is just no reason why, we shouldn't be advocating this as an option for anyone. And I think so much of that is changing thanks to, people like you and Claudia, and really getting the word out there and changing this from, something that people are ashamed to talk about and feel so, embarrassed or so much despair around, to a realization that it's a physical addiction. Yes, there are many components to addiction, and certainly mental well-being and spirituality for many of us, come into play. But in general, we don't talk about the physical addiction piece of it much, or we think that it only applies like if you are just, so far gone, that you're having the shakes and withdrawals. And like, that's, like you say, that's not the case. You can be physically addicted to something and it can be taking up a lot of mental headspace way before you get to that point.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely. And so I wanted to ask you also, because I know from your personal story, just because I've known your story, when you decided to opt for sobriety or alcohol-free lifestyle, there were some like challenging transition periods with that, of course. Did you want to speak to any of that today?
I would, because I think your story is so interesting here too. So, and I'm sure that a lot of your viewers know it, or maybe they don't. I don't know, but I think everyone's different about this. If you have a partner, that you live with, whether it's a spouse or a roommate or someone close to you, it's just a really important part of your story, I think, because at least it was for me. Because my husband and I drank together. So it was tied up for both of us. Now, he did not have any of the issues that I have with it at all. So it's very interesting because he didn't really recognize them in me. He didn't really understand them in me. And that took, it took a lot for us. And we had counseling along the way and lots of discussion. I never expected him to do what I was doing, but I also knew that as my, life partner and best friend, that he would want to support me, and he did. And so, it was easy enough in those 11 months, right, when I was still drinking. And he ended up drinking a lot less during those times too, because he didn't really care, right? So when I quit drinking on weeknights, he didn't really care, so he just didn't drink then either. It was when I decided to stop that things got interesting, because the habit and routine of having a drink together was so ingrained that, it just sort of stopped him. Like when I wasn't drinking at all anymore, then he wasn't either. And then as instances would come up, whether it be people coming over or parties or whatever. I mean, it was pandemic. There wasn't a lot going on, but it was mainly more in the summer, right, when things got interesting. It was really harder for me than I anticipated to not drink with him. And I think that also the level of stress that we were feeling with the kids and school and pandemic, I mean, I don't know about you. It's hard to even kind of go back there right now. It's such a weird thing that we've all been through in the last 2 years. But like, if you remember that first summer of shutdown, it was very strange. We were all like, what is happening here? And how are we going about things? Stress was high. And in particular, I remember reaching out to you when, he had just sort of offhandedly let me know I was going to go away for a night and write. And as I sometimes did in pandemic, just to get kind of a breather, you have to take a mental health break from everything. And I remember thinking like, oh, weird, like you're going to drink while I'm not here. Like, that's like, why would that bother me? And it did. And it was really hard, I think, because if I'm honest with myself, the idea that, he had that shortcut to stress relief and I didn't anymore started to flare up. There was this 2 decades of drinking behind me, even though the last 11 months had been really fantastic. This was stress at a new level in a new way. And the idea of not having that shortcut, which is really what alcohol was for me in many ways, a shortcut to relaxation, right? To able to push, anxiety away, of course, only temporarily and to my own detriment, but still in the short term. It was really hard. Anyway, we went through a lot together on that front, and we came to some agreements that worked really well for us. And, actually, to this day, he does not drink with me at all. And on his own accord, he is just not drinking anymore in general. I don't know if that's going to be how that is. Again, pandemic, things have been kind of strange the last couple of years with social events. I don't know if that will be the same for him forever. But what I can say is that, once again, exercise in humility for me to have to really admit how hard that was for me and to ask for what I needed. This whole thing has just been, one series after another, opportunity and challenge for me to ask for help, which I've struggled with a lot in my life. And so even with him, to ask for help in that regard, again, back to, the habits, right, that are so ingrained and so there, and trying to figure out how we navigate that and do that. And I know that's not everyone's experience with their spouse. Some people have no problem with their spouse drinking in front of them, at home, around them. So I just want to be clear, like I wish I were there. Maybe I will be someday. And it's not because even that I want that drink, just to be clear, like I don't have that craving anymore. It's just something about, kind of being in it together and feeling the camaraderie around how we're going to raise our children and how we're going to, function in the family. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I so appreciate you being so vulnerable and honest about that, because I think that that's a common question I get, from people about the whole socializing with drinking, if they're, opting not to drink, or if they're doing the Sinclair method, or, because my husband, he drinks and I don't drink. So that is a common question people get of whether, how that dynamic plays out. And I will say that, like, he's never had a problem either. And if he did, I think that's where it would be really challenging for me, just because, like, that's nothing, I don't want to have that as part of my life anymore. And so I'm grateful that he doesn't have an issue, just like your husband, because that would be a strain. Like, because I've, have friends and dated people who were heavy drinkers, and I don't know that I could coexist with that, being alcohol free. But like you said, like, I don't have the craving for it. He can drink if he wants, and, like, it doesn't, I'm like, but I think having kids, it would be a different dynamic, because we don't have kids. And so, like, as like parents, what you want to model for your kids, and, the extra responsibility that comes with children, like, that's a whole other layer of complexity that I can't understand. But yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Well, thanks for letting me be a little messy about it. Clearly that's I think going to be something we're talking about for years to come. And there's just always going to be places, for growth and opportunity. But what I can say is that I feel incredibly supported, and that I know I would not be talking to you right now if you had not put what you had put on YouTube explaining your experience, and if he had not been so willing to support me through all of this. It just, it sounds cheesy to say it takes a village, but it really does, and when it comes to addiction, you just cannot do that alone. You've got to be willing, or I should say, I had to be willing, not you, I had to be willing to ask for help and to receive it, which was hard.
No, and that's such an important point too, because I relate so much. Like, I didn't want to ask for help either with anything. It's like, oh, I got this. I want to figure it out on my own. And I was very humbled, like, a few months into the Sinclair method, when I realized that I was drinking for a lot more reasons than I just like to drink. There was stuff I was kind of masking and numbing out. And that's when I started to go to therapy and, like, get some extra support. But I had a lot of pride around that too. And it hurts my heart, I will say, to, like, just see that. I made a video on my channel about this a couple months ago, because I see people in, like, the free Facebook groups and things that are really struggling. They're like a year or 2 years on the method, and they're not where they want to be. And I'm like, do you have support? Are you seeing a coach? Are you seeing a therapist? Are you working on habit change? And oftentimes there's a lot that they're not doing that they could be. And I just wonder if it's like, that similar thing that you and I both experienced, just like, we don't want to ask for help, whether it's shame or just pride, or, alcohol is when we have alcohol use disorder, it's kind of a very isolating thing. It's a way for us to maintain control in some sense in our life, even though it makes us lose control at the same time. I wondered, like, I have a couple more questions, and I want to start wrapping up with you here. And I know we're going to, by the way, I didn't mention this earlier, but Catherine is someone who uses tapping as a way to overcome habits or heal things. And so we're going to talk a little bit about tapping too. But I did just want to ask if you had any insights or reflections on why you personally had a hard time asking for help. Like, I know you've mentioned pride a couple of times, but I'm just wondering if there was something more tangible that you have realized the last couple of years.
Oh God, that's such a good question. Thank you for asking. And I wish I wish I could articulate this better. Let's see. I've always wanted to be of service and help others. And part of that coping mechanism, right, if you will, part of that lens is great. And part of it is, as I become more aware of it and in tune with my motivations, part of it is, so I'll be liked, so I'll be loved, right? So again, it's the sort of like everyone's superpower is it's a double-edged sword. It's also our Achilles heel sometimes, right? And so, coming to terms with that So I'll say this, you and I have talked about how we kind of came to therapy in different ways. I sort of in my mid-30s went, I guess I'm drinking because I've got issues that I need to sort out, or I'm not facing challenges in life. So I went the opposite way. Like I kind of dove into therapy first and really tried to work a lot of things out. And then scratched my head years later when I was like, okay, wait a minute. I feel like I've cleaned out all the corners, dusted all the cobwebs. Not that I've figured it out, but I mean, I've faced a lot of these things. And why am I still wanting to drink? Right. So it sort of, for me, was a little bit of the other way, as opposed to quit drinking and then, and then that led me into therapy. So I will say, as a part of that experience with self-growth and self-discovery and all of that, I used the Enneagram as a way to see my blind spots and to sort of uncover things about my personality that I just couldn't see myself, right? And so I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram, but it's like a personality typing system. And one of my favorite jokes about personality tests is that all of them are wrong and some of them are helpful. So I'll just say that much. I don't know that I want to get into what's right or wrong, but what I can say is that there was nothing that was more enlightening or helpful to me in that journey, and continues to be, than using the Enneagram. And so through that process, I really started to understand the motivation behind some of my helping and giving, and that needing to always be fine. I'm fine. What can I do for you? Right. So that really is what's beneath that, I think, for me, is a certain pride in wanting everything to be okay here so that I can be of service. How can I help you? And the idea of humbling myself to really accept and understand that, of course, I'm not fine. Nobody is. We're all dealing with all kinds of things. And not only that, but I also need help. And I have to learn to receive that help. That it may sound really simple, especially if that isn't not everyone has that lens. Like for some people, they just like, oh yeah, that's no big deal for me. I am always able to ask for help or admit those things. But it wasn't for me. And so if you're like me and that makes sense to you, this will resonate for you, that the idea of actually admitting that I can't do it and that I have to have some help here, especially with something this big. It's different with like smaller things, but something this big, that took a lot for me to even just be able to say those words and recognize what was going on, and accept, help from you. I mean, I remember I was unsure about that first Zoom meeting with you for, all the days leading up to it. I was still like, do I really need to like reach out to someone? Like, I'm sure she has better, more important things to do, or, other people to talk to or something. I mean, it took a lot. And then once I connected with you, I realized like, oh, of course. Yeah, no, I'm going to need guides here and help. And, thank you so much for doing that.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for articulating your experience so clearly, because I think you put it in words that I haven't been able to articulate for myself either, as part of the reasons why I also had a hard time asking for help and receiving the help. Like, because you can ask for it, but to receive it is another thing. Like, that's another action we have to take, is actually sit back, accept it, allow it. And that still plays out in my life, to be honest. Like, it's constantly something to work on. But yeah, that's such an important piece to talk on that I think a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah.
So I have one more question for you, and I want to then ask you about tapping. So just, okay, you've been sober or alcohol-free or abstinent, whatever you want to call it, the last 2 years. So what has that been like in general for you? Like, how would you describe the experience of being alcohol-free through the Sinclair Method?
First, I'll say so much easier than I ever expected. When I envisioned, first of all, I could never imagine it. Even when I started on the Sinclair Method, never had any intent of it. I always thought I would want to drink and just would drink, here and there, at least. And then when I did imagine it, I imagined it being, like you said earlier, a real struggle, like, oh, well, I'd be like, oh, every day, one day at a time, and really, white knuckling it and just suffering, internally and always wishing for it. So all these fears I had, right? I love that acronym fear, false expectations appearing real, right? I had all these expectations of what that would look like, and none of them are true. It's so much easier than I ever expected. One of the, I mean, all the health stuff, right, is just amazing to me as far as just sleeping better. I had no idea what those, even when I was on TSM, when I was doing the Sinclair method, still having a drink at night before bed, I think was disruptive of my REM sleep. And so now having none, I sleep better and I feel better. So there's all this wonderful physical, aspects. And then just this self-respect, I think, is the word I'm going to land on there. There's a sense that I did not anticipate. I also was not going after this, but here it is. It's wow, yeah, something that I was really addicted to and that had a really strong grip on me for a long time just doesn't anymore. And I don't do that anymore. And I have a sense of self-respect around that I didn't. Again, I wasn't even looking for that, but here it is. And it's given me, a sense of confidence in my ability to do hard things that, in a very real way, right? And back to the humility piece, in a way that required receiving help, admitting that I had a problem, admitting I needed help, and then, like you said, to your point, receiving it. That's another conversation, right? So maybe slowly, and it'll be a lifelong process for me too, but slowly but surely through this experience, I will learn to continue to receive help and ask for it more and more. But yeah, someone said to me recently, I don't know anyone who has regretted stopping drinking. And that's true, right? There's just nothing about this that doesn't feel great, and the headspace I have now, for me anyway, and this is not something I expected, even on the Sinclair method, I would think about, okay, I'm going to go out to dinner, at this time. So I want to make sure I take my pill, here. There was still some logistics and headspace around it that were fine, but I love not having any of that anymore. I just love that that's not a question. It's just very simple now. The, answer is clear to me. I just don't drink. So that's fine. I'll have water or I'll have something else, or one of my, amazing, there's so many NA brews now. And there's even a brewery here in Colorado, up in Boulder, that's brewing teas and waters with hops. Oh. So yeah, it's just, there's just so many things out there to spend my finite amount of energy and time on. And I'm really glad that it's not getting split between thinking about, am I drinking too much? When can I drink again? How much can I drink tonight? So I'm back to that word freedom. That's what it's been for me these couple of years. It's just been a lot more freedom.
That's so cool. And I love that you brought up self-respect too, because and you articulate things so well, but I wasn't really aware that I didn't have self-respect, or that I was, in this state of just extremely low confidence in a sense, and operating from that every day with my husband at work. I just that was the norm for me, for drinking heavily for 10 years. But as we get out of that and we start to treat ourselves better and have this confidence in who we are, and because we have a clear mind and we feel healthier, we can show up and have more of a voice. It's just all of these benefits that come from getting out of the alcohol trap. So self-respect, same here. I had no self-respect before, or very little. I would be very disrespectful to myself through my thoughts, through my actions. And coming out of that with the Sinclair method, it just gradually let me turn into somebody that, I felt more confident to be. So thank you so much for speaking to that as well.
My pleasure.
So you are, I don't know, if what your title is with tapping, if it's a hobby or if it's a profession or what you do with it. So I've looked at tapping and used it for sugar cravings. And so for people who are not familiar with what tapping is, will you do an introduction for maybe your work with tapping and what tapping is? And then we're actually going to walk through a tapping exercise, which is going to be really, really helpful. So what is tapping for somebody who's like, what are you even talking about?
Yeah, I'm not a tap dancer, that's for sure. So just clear that up because sometimes people like think that's what I'm talking about. No, tapping is, first of all, I am an attorney. That's my profession. This is a hobby. And I have just been, you know, so helped by meditation in my life that anything in that realm has always been helpful to me. I do have ADHD, and sometimes I really struggle to meditate. And so having other practices that can help me when I can't sit still, when I don't want to, or to help me kind of get into it. So, walking meditations or, other practices that can kind of help get me there. And tapping is one of them. So it is just basically, and we'll do it in a minute, but it's just tapping on certain acupressure points on the body. There's 9 of them that we use in a tapping session. And so it's combining this ancient acupressure, work with modern therapeutic techniques. So basically, we're just going to use our words to talk through whatever's going on. So it sounds like you've used it before, so you understand. You might be using affirmations or something along those lines. I think what's really unique about it, and what I love, besides that I'm moving and it feels good, so there's that aspect of it. But is that there's an acceptance piece to it. There's a humility to it, because unlike maybe traditional affirmations that you might think of, I've never been one for, I'm feeling great today, if I'm not, like, that just is like cognitive disconnect, and I don't like that, right? So sometimes I know some affirmations work really well for folks, but with tapping, I'd say it's a little more realistic. So we do use affirmations, but at least the way I do it, the way I've started to use it for myself, is they're a little softer. And instead of just going right into what the positive thing is and what we want to envision, you hear a lot about manifestation and, using kind of just only envisioning the vibration we want to be at, or what we want to see. And there's something to that for sure. But what tapping incorporates, at least the way I'm going to use it today, is starting with an acceptance of where we're at. So we're actually going to start with acknowledging the negative. And some people are like, whoa, I don't even want to put that out there. I don't want to say that out loud. And I understand, that's not for everyone. But I think that there is something to be said, and a lot of this comes from my experience with alcohol use disorder. You don't know what you need to let go of until you know what you're holding. And so there is an important part of the process in growth, which is admitting that there is something there that you don't like and don't want or want to release. And so tapping does that. So it can seem a little strange to people, like, wait, we're going to talk about what's wrong and we're going to get into it. And, we're going to do a really short, just one round here. But, I would say, again, this is just a hobby for me. The Tapping Solution by the Ortner family, that's their app, and you can find them on anywhere, YouTube, Instagram. Jessica Ortner and her brothers, they just have such amazing resources out there. And so anything I'm doing is just, just my own take on that. And maybe we just talk about what the tapping points are first. Do you want to?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, let's talk about that.
So there's 9 of them, and the first is the eyebrow point, and it's just where the eyebrow meets the nose, right there. It doesn't matter which hand, and some people do both. That feels good to them, or they just do one. Okay, and then if you follow that bone over to the side of your eye, so not your temple, right, but that bone on the side of your eye, that's the next one. And then under, so again on the bone, under the eye. And then under the nose, just right there above the lip. Under the mouth, which is kind of in that crease, right under the lip, on top of the chin. And then collarbone. Some people just do one hand, sort of right on or below their collarbones. I like to go kind of down and out just a little bit right there with both. And you can kind of feel, like, some of these will kind of resonate for you or they won't, right? You can kind of get into what feels good. Right, this is kind of the most awkward one to explain because especially where I am, but it's going to be the side of the, we call it under the arm. So about 1 hand width under the armpit on the rib cage. Can't get it. Yeah, there you go. You're doing it better. The monkey one, my kids call this, right? Now we look like a monkey. And we finish up really looking like a monkey with the top. But it is kind of fun for kids too. So with all the moving around. So that's the top of the head, and that's it. So that's 1 round. And, you know, I'm just throw it out there. Obviously, if any of those feel good to you, you don't have to sit down and do a whole tapping session. You know, I find myself doing this one a lot just to kind of get back into my body.
I didn't realize you could do, I thought it had to be done in like the cycle. So that's good to know that you can do certain points. You don't necessarily have to do the whole cycle.
I mean, when it comes to this stuff, I just think whatever is working for you and helping you to feel good in your body, you know?
Yeah. And so just quickly, like, what does tapping help with in general? Like I mentioned earlier, I've looked up and used videos on YouTube for sugar cravings, and I've honestly haven't stuck with it enough to see if it would work for me. So, but in your life, or like, you know, what have you seen it help people with?
Well, I mean, I'll say personally, I'll speak to my own experience. It really helped me through a period of grief. I was grieving the loss. My dad died in November of 2020. Again, very glad I was already not drinking. I'm thinking about that year and how much stress there was. And I had a really hard time meditating after he passed. And I found tapping to just be a really great way for me to acknowledge the sadness, acknowledge how much I missed him. And then, so it's like, it kind of gave me the space to sit with it, and then to move out of it, right? And then I could kind of move to a more positive place so I could get, you know, on with my day. I mean, that's the thing about grief, is it's never convenient, right? But that helped me through that a lot. The real benefit, I mean, we know all about neural rewiring, right, with naltrexone. This is the same concept. The idea is that when we feel stress from anything, so whether it's grief, sugar craving, alcohol craving, just the one we're going to do here in a minute, just stress in general, whatever's going on, what's coming up, that's going to, you know, release certain hormones, right? We're going to go into fight or flight, right? And we're going to have this low level anxiety, or maybe even really high. And the idea with tapping is that these points that we're tapping on are literally, oh, I forgot the first one, side of the hand. Sorry, that's really important one. We'll start always here to kind of just get ourselves centered. This is also really calming. Some people, and this is a nice one you can kind of do under a table, right? Like at work or something, nobody, you know, has to see that. That's very calming. So these pressure points, as we're tapping on them, they are simultaneously sending a message to our nervous system that we're safe, that everything's okay, right? So you're doing that while gently bringing up whatever is causing the anxiety. And so what you're doing is that next time that comes up, you're helping to rewire your brain so that your body can stay a little calmer when that thought arises. And so it's really powerful in that way. The most amazing studies I've read about tapping deal with post-traumatic stress syndrome from veterans. And just, you know, that's almost mind-blowing to me that tapping could help with something that, you know, traumatic for someone. I'm not using it for anything like that, but I know people do, and it's been really helpful.
That's wonderful. Okay, so are you ready to do an example tapping session for us? Get some.
Yes, and like
liquid.
I say, this will be a short one. We'll just do one round, but it'll give you a taste of it. And who knows, maybe Katie will feel a little calmer even after this. Okay, so just taking a minute to just get comfortable, you know, if you need to stretch or, yeah, I always say, let's take the biggest breath we've taken all day. And then inevitably I yawn, which is good. Yawning is a great release. So just yawn, whatever, shake. Okay. And then you can either repeat what I'm going to say out loud or silently. It doesn't matter. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable. No need, but I'm going to keep mine open to look at my notes. Okay. So just do whatever works for you there. Okay. So we're going to start on side of our hand here. Okay, even though I'm feeling some stress and overwhelm, I honor these feelings and give my body permission to relax. Even though I feel this tension, I allow myself to feel more ease now. Even though I have this stress, I'm willing to accept it and begin to let it go. And moving to the eyebrow point, I honor the stress that I've been under. Side of the eye. I know my mind is only trying to keep me safe with all these thoughts. Under the eye. In this moment, I am safe. Under the nose. It's safe and helpful to take a break from thinking for these few moments. Under the mouth, and to be more aware of my body and my breath. And under the arm. After all, I can't stress myself to solutions. And top of the head. I am willing to feel better. And that's it. Great job. See, you're a pro, Katie.
Thank you. I had my microphone on mute, but I was mimicking after you. It really centers you into your body. Like that is something that I often work with my clients on, is like doing self check-ins throughout the day, because I would find when we have alcohol use disorder, we kind of like deplete ourselves all day long, and we're just kind of looking forward to that evening reward ritual of drinking. At least that was the case for me. And so having these self check-ins throughout the day of like, what needs do I have right now? Am I thirsty? Am I hungry? How am I doing? And so, but I just feel like that really like, whew, just like sucked me into like my body and really did tone things down a bit or something. That's really cool. Thank you.
I'm glad that you feel that way. I do too. I know, I've certainly spoken with some people who the tapping isn't relaxing for them. It might kind of ramp them up if they're in an anxious state. And so, I just to say, like, I don't think this is necessarily for every single person, much like the Sinclair method. But like you and I always talk about, in Claudia's foundation, right? Options save lives. And we need all the tools and techniques to be out there, because something will work for you. Something will help. And I really like the tapping for, I didn't use it back in the beginning with the cravings. I just didn't know much about it then, wasn't using it as much. But I think now that would have been really helpful way to deal with that. And certainly, although I don't have the alcohol cravings that I'm dealing with now, I got plenty of things that pull me out of my body and derail me. And so tapping is always a wonderful way to recenter myself. And like I say, I often can use that before like a more traditional sitting meditation, just to help me center, calm down. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And I understand you have an Instagram with tapping, and are there so where can people find you and find more information about tapping, which I'll link it beneath this video as well, but just for you to tell us as well.
Yes, it's just Tap with Cat, no spaces, Tap with Cat. And again, it's a hobby, and by all means, I encourage people to go find other tapping resources as well. You need to find people that have the right cadence and voice and all those things for you. But I also wanted to put Tap with Cat out there just for anyone watching this who, maybe you're an attorney or a mom, or maybe you just have something that resonates with you about my story or similar. I welcome people to reach out about the Sinclair method, about questions they might be having, because it was nothing short of a miracle for me. And if there's any way that I can pay that forward, you know, I really want to.
Thank you so much. And just to clarify, that's Instagram, right? Tap with Kat.
Yes, Tap with Kat on Instagram.
Great. So I'll put it below as well as a link. So man, it has been such an awesome conversation. I just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything that you did with me. I'm just like so full right now. And I loved being able to help you tell your story. And yeah, just thank you so much.
It's absolutely my honor. I don't even know how to respond to you thanking me, so, but I'm going to try and receive that.
Yes.
But I just want to say thank you one more time. You're an angel in my life, and I would not be where I am without you. And I'm really so appreciative that you had the courage to share your experience openly with people, and that changed my life. Thank you for sharing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you. It means the world, and I'm so glad it reached you. And I know your story will reach thousands of people for years to come. So thank you for also having the courage, because I know not everyone wants to obviously put their name out there or their face out there. So thank you again. And maybe I'll have you back at some point in the future as well.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Katie.
Kat. Take care.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.